Today, we're going to be breaking down good versus bad quarterback throwing mechanics. So this first example here is going to be a common bad habit that a lot of quarterbacks will make when it comes to their throwing mechanics. And then we're going to be breaking down the correct way to go about it and what a perfect mechanical throwing sequence should look like. So this is a clip here from our camp that we had a couple weeks back in Dallas, Texas. Now, this quarterback, 12-year-old quarterback, or I think he's 13 actually, can sling the ball, has a ton of velocity, ton of arm talent, but he makes a crucial mistake that a lot of quarterbacks will make that will hurt them long term, right? And so this is something that we were constantly working throughout this camp. I'm not trying to put this kid on blast at all. It's a great example for you guys to see because I know a lot of you have this same habit. So I'm going to play it full speed and then we'll break down his mechanics. So one of the common mistakes that a lot of quarterbacks will make is that they will push to create their front stride. So this quarterback's got a perfect base, right? He's nice and relaxed up top. He's got weight loaded on his back leg. His base has probably maybe about like 60 to 70% loaded on it. But watch what happens when that front stride gets down. He doesn't even necessarily have an overstride, but you see how that back knee is caving in, and it almost looks like to create the front stride, he is pushing off of the back foot. That is one of the crucial mistakes that QBs make because a lot of old school quarterback coaches used to teach this. Now, what this will cause is a disruption of the timing of your throwing sequence, and we're going to break that down and why that's important, okay? So guys, so first things first, let's talk about the throwing mechanical sequence. When I go to throw, all of your power is going to come from where? It's going to come from your legs and it's going to come from your hips. But it doesn't just come from the legs and the hips. It comes from the timing of the rotation of your hips and the timing of that weight transfer from your legs into your throw. So I like to break up the throwing sequence into 4 specific parts. You got your base, you got your front stride, you got your hip rotation, and then the shoulders and the balls come through in that specific order. And we're going to show 2 examples, guys, of Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady towards the end of this video with that exact mechanical sequence. I just want you guys to understand this first. So when you guys get to this base, this is a perfect base. You want probably 60 to 65% of your weight loaded onto your back leg, and you want to keep your weight shifted slightly back, right? Now, why do you want to do that? You almost want to think of throwing a football like hitting a baseball. When you're in the batter's box, your head isn't shifted forward. Your weight isn't loaded onto your front leg. Your weight is essentially stacked. Your head, your knee, and your foot are all stacked on top of each other. Your weight is back because what that allows you to do is to keep some weight behind the step that you take to the pitcher. Okay? Hitters of a baseball and quarterbacks both create something called torque. Torque is how we're able to generate power, but I don't get torque if I can't get something called separation between my upper body and my lower body, and that's why it's important to keep your weight back. So remember, what's the throwing sequence? We have my base. What happens next? The stride, but the stride needs to be separate from your back leg drive. So you don't want to drive off the back leg to create a front stride. You want the stride to be a separate event. You want to keep your weight exactly where this quarterback has his weight on his back leg, even when you take a step with your front foot to the target. Because guys, when you have your weight loaded onto your back leg, what that helps you do is get something called shoulder rotation, aka shoulder and hip dissociation. That means that your shoulders are going back as the front foot gets down and the hips are firing through. The hips come through before the shoulders do. Kind of like a baseball swing, right? Pitcher throws us a pitch. We step to the pitcher, but I'm keeping the bat loaded. I'm keeping my shoulder back. I've heard a lot of baseball coaches say this, and I started saying this with my quarterbacks. Pretend you have a flashlight on your throwing side knee, and your flashlight is trying to stay pointed out towards the sideline as you step to the target. So let's say I'm throwing a post. I'm stepping to the post, but that back knee is not moving. That back knee is not caving. I am keeping my weight back. Because when you keep your weight back, that will allow you to rotate your shoulders in this direction. And Aaron Rodgers has a great sequence with this, and I can't wait for you guys to be able to actually see that in a second. So your shoulders can rotate back. Front foot's already anchored down on the ground. I have all this weight loaded on my back leg. So what do I do now? I transfer that weight from my back quad to my front quad. My hips fire through, and the ball and the shoulders trail behind, creating a whip, aka torque. Now, the mistake that this quarterback makes is you see how all of his body weight shifts forward on the foot strike. So now it's because he's pushing to create the foot strike. And a lot of quarterback coaches teach that. A lot of old school guys teach that. They say you want to push off the middle arch of your back foot to create this front strike. Guys, you don't want to do that because what ends up happening is you see where's all of his body weight now? His head, his knee, and his foot are all shifted forward. So he physically can't rotate his shoulders back and get that hip and shoulder dissociation. So what ends up happening is that when he's pushing, yeah, he's trying to rotate from his hips, but he has all this unnecessary force coming open with his shoulders. So he does something called over-rotating. When your shoulders and your hips are both opening at the same time, you over-rotate. So that swings your body, your head in this direction. And so what happens is that your release point flies outside of your body frame. Because when you throw, you want to try to keep your spine completely straight. But whatever this front side does, that will throw your body off of something called the midline. And that midline is an imaginary line that goes down the middle of your body. I guess it's not really imaginary, it's your spine, right? So when you have all this rotational force this way, your arm flies outside your body frame. Whatever your front side does, your throwing side is going to do the same thing, but the opposite direction. So that ball, you see how wide it is outside of his frame. You see how his palm is kind of facing outward. And this ball, I know you guys can't see it, it missed behind a wide receiver and the spin was almost sideways. And I know you guys have that problem. And all that's from is over-rotating with the front side and with that hip. When the shoulder and the hip opens at the same time, that causes that over-rotation. You see how his front foot swings open, his hips and his shoulders are facing here. Guys, when we throw, you want your hips and your shoulders parallel to the target. And we're going to show that with this example of Aaron Rodgers. Now, before we get into this example of Aaron Rodgers throwing, guys, if you're a quarterback and you would like to train with us this offseason, we are going to be coming out to 9 more cities across the country for 2-day-long QB and wide receiver training camps. So guys, if you're local to one of these cities, Nashville, Chicago, Buffalo, Atlanta, Houston, Philly, Detroit, Boise, or Los Angeles, guys, check out that very first link in the description below. We'd love to have you out to one of our off-season camps when we are visiting these cities. A lot of our camps are sold out in Nashville, Chicago, Buffalo, Philly. We do have a wait list, but the other camps, guys, will sell out within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So guys, check out that very first link in the description below if you'd like to sign up and work with myself and my staff of coaches. We would love to have you there. Let's get back to this video. So now, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers here. So now, remember guys, what's the throwing sequence that we talked about? First things first is it's got to be the base, right? So my base has got to be 65% loaded onto my back leg. You want your head, you want your knee, and you want your foot stacked on top of each other. And that's exactly where Rodgers is right now. And same deal as the last quarterback. That last quarterback from our camp, same exact deal. He was in that stacked position. But it's more than just getting to this position. You also have to have the right sequence timing. Remember, so it's about base. What happens next? Front stride. And that front stride is separate from the back foot push or the back leg drive and the hip rotation. It should not happen at the same time. Why is that? Because when you keep your weight back and that stride happens separately, what can you do with your shoulders? You can rotate your shoulders in this direction. That's upper body and lower body dissociation. That means your upper body's going back as the lower body is stepping and going through. So remember, weight's back, you stride, shoulders go back as we stride. What happens next? Hips fire through, then the ball trails behind. That's exactly what Rodgers gets. So I'm going to play at full speed, and then we'll slow it down and break it down. So again, this is probably the best throwing sequence there is, guys. And it's so funny, and you can't, this is Rodgers. Notice how I'm not talking about how he holds the ball, how he takes the ball back. I'm talking about things that every single quarterback can add to their game. Everybody throws the ball differently. Everybody has a different genetic makeup, different body type, but all these things. We're going to show an example of Tom Brady too. So guys, those are two very different types of passers and two very different types of quarterbacks, but they have the key mechanical sequence points, those 4 points. So watch what happens. Front foot gets down. What's his back knee doing? Flashlight. Remember, flashlight's pointed towards the sideline when the front foot makes contact with the ground. So what can he do? He could rotate back. He's keeping his head, his knee, and his foot stacked on the foot strike. So guess what happens next? That hip can fire through. And you see how that hip is coming through before the elbow, before the ball. And when he releases this thing, you see how he doesn't have that crazy over-rotation. He's able to just stay nice and smooth. This release point isn't flying way outside of his frame because his shoulder and his hip aren't coming open at the same time because he's not pushing on the foot strike. He's not shifting his weight forward. He is keeping his weight back on the foot strike. This is where we want to be, you guys. Contrary to the last example, I'll show the last example where the foot strike hits, but you see how all of his weight is shifted forward. That's the difference. Because guys, when we push like this and that back foot trails behind me, my back hip trails behind me, and when I throw, my elbow and my football are ahead, like in front of my back hip, that puts a lot of also unnecessary strain on the elbow and unnecessary strain on my shoulder. Because some of you might be thinking, well, if the ball gets there, who cares? I care because it's about sustainability. Sustainability comes from good throwing mechanics. I want to be able to do 100 reps at a practice and not feel my arm at all, right? Like not feel any pain in my arm at all. I don't want to do 100 reps at practice and then I'm having to ice my arm for the next 3 days. And having a flawed mechanical sequence will lead to that, right? So let's look at this example here of Tom Brady, right? Look at his knee. And I've seen interviews of Tom Brady talk about how he says that he tries to press his knee in this direction. So he almost presses out as the front foot gets down, right? So watch what happens. Front foot makes contact with the ground. Where's his knee? Flashlight, you guys. And he has a naturally wider base than Aaron Rodgers. Again, guys, not everybody's going to throw the ball the exact same way, but there are mechanical points that every elite passer has, and that's what you want to try to add to your game. So this front foot gets down, but you see flashlight pointed out. Where are his shoulders? Rotated back. He's in that dissociation position. So what needs to happen next? Remember, we had base, we had stride. As the stride goes down, the shoulders go back. What happens next? Hips. So you see how the hip is coming through? Look, hip is here. Elbow, football, trailing behind. You want to get to this C-curve position. And guys, this takes pressure off the arm, but that's how we generate torque, you guys. Torque and velocity, consistent velocity, comes from me keeping this back as the foot strike gets down. Guys, pretend there's a laser beam on your knee. When your front foot steps to the target, that laser's to the sideline. Pretend there's a flashlight on your knee. When the front foot steps, the flashlight is flashing towards the sideline. Keep your weight back on the foot strike, and you guys will see a huge difference in the velocity on your throws. And it will take pressure off your arm. It will feel effortless, and that is ultimately the goal.